G'day ladies and gentlemen, ScottyD here from the Australia's Tabletop Wargaming Network, and welcome into the next installment in our series, From Sprue to Tabletop. Alrighty ladies and gentlemen, so we are going to be getting some paint on our primed assault intercessor in this video, which is going to be looking at your base coating, layers, and paint sequencing, where we're going to talk about the equipment that you need to actually do your painting. We're going to talk through the brushes that I'm going to be using and in these stages of both base coats and layers, as well as talking about paint sequencing, where you might order your paints in a particular way so that you're doing the most amount of work with your base coats and keeping it as neat as possible if that is your style. Very similar to myself, when I do paint my Space Marines, I'm quite a neat painter when I am painting them as well. But as always with these videos, take away what you want to apply to your own hobbying and leave what you do not want to apply to your own hobbying as well. This is just a method to help new people in the hobby figuring out how to paint some of their first miniatures, and it is not the only way to go about it. We will look at other ways later on in this series, but it's only there as a bit of guidance and help to direct you along the ways that you may want to start painting up your miniatures. So I reckon let's start slapping some paint on this assault intercessor. Alrighty, so as you can see, we're now set up to start working on actually getting the base coats onto this assault intercessor that we've got still full together. He's all been undercoated, ready to go for painting. So before we do get into any painting, a few things that I want to touch on. Always make sure you've got a nice clean pot of water for every painting session. That way you're able to keep your brushes relatively clean throughout the session. I personally use a wet palette. I find it helps with keeping the paints lasting a bit longer when I am working on multiple models with the same color. We've also got a paper towel that we can wipe our brushes off onto. We've got the brushes that we're intending to use, and we've got the 9 different colors that we're going to be base coating and working on touch-ups on the assault intercessor with. We've also got 5 different paint pots. Now, I generally use paint pots that have completely been used or dried up, and what I do is I just grab a bit of blue tack. You could use model putty, museum putty, various other kinds of putty or adhesive that you can put on top of these, or you can use timber blocks with wire coming out of them. There's many different ways that you can do adhesives for holding your models together, but what we're going to do to start off with, I'm going to grab the assault intercessor and we're just going to quickly pull him apart. Pull each of the 5 different pieces off, so then we can actually come over to each one of these and we're just affixing them to the bottom of the base for the main torso. And then what we'll do for this piece right here, we're just going to pop it on the back side. For the backpack, we're going to use the actual rod that is sticking out of it so that we're able to stick it onto there relatively easily. Then for the 2 arms, we're actually going to start off with by sticking the chainsword into the blue tack itself on there and doing a very similar thing with the plasma pistol. So now that we've gotten those all good to go, we're actually going to start by looking at the brushes we've got. We've got 3 army painted brushes that I primarily use for base coating when I'm not airbrushing my primary base coat color. We've got the regiment brush, which is a nice large brush, can hold a decent amount of paint, and we'll be ready to go for when we are wanting to apply the base coat of the armor. We've then got the character brush, which is a great brush for those kind of middle colors, middle details, stuff like your metals, any weapon colors, things like that. And then we have got our detail brush, so this is going to be good for doing some of the metal in various areas, faces, weapon teeth, any gold or anything like that. So there are the 3 kind of brushes that we're going to be working with today. And so we're going to put those off to the side. We've wet them, they're ready to go. And so we're going to start off with Cantor Blue, that is our base coat. So you want to give it a nice good shake. Make sure it's all good to go. Now generally I won't do this with good brushes because I'll have a set brush that I'll do this with, but you want to make sure you grab out a whole heap from there and just pop it onto your wet palette. Now I like to, after doing so with the G-Dub pot, go around and actually get all of the paint from underneath, because if you don't do that, you'll end up with it all clumped around the top. And before I start painting, I'll clean off the regiment brush, so then when we get into actually painting the base coat, it's nice and clean and ready to go for the amount that we are wanting to grab. So we're going to grab a bit of water into the brush, and what we're going to do is we're just going to mix it in, water it down a little bit, and we're actually going to make sure that it's not super thick, but at the same time it's going to be nice enough to work with. So then what we're going to do, we're going to grab our actual assault intercessor body, and we are just going to start applying the base coat right around the model. Now, something else that you'll notice that I'm doing as I am applying the base coating is that I am rotating the model in the direction that I am wanting to see, so I'm able to actually apply the base coat where I can see and get into all those different areas where it's potentially going to be needing the blue armor base coat. We can leave some of these areas if we want to, just the black as well. Depends on your brush control, so we've got some spots that are going to be more left as the black as we work our way through, and slowly but surely we are getting this base coating done. Now, over time, you'll want to, as you're doing your base coats, you'll want to wash out your brush, make sure it's nice and clean, wipe it on the paper towel, and then as you do so, you just want to twist it so you can get that nice fine point as best as you can. Some brushes, obviously, like this one's seen some good use, so it might not do that. You could also do it with your fingers as well. When it is wet, you just need to get a little bit more, and just make sure it's all nice and clean and it's ready to go to get some more paint out, because we've run out of the Cantor blue. So we're going to grab some more out, and we're just going to keep on trucking along. Same process as before. Alrighty, so now that we have completed the first round of base coats, I wanted to show you something. So sometimes when you are base coating with a brush, what you'll see is you might find that you'll have areas that it doesn't get full coverage on, or it comes through quite streaky in places as well. So what you want to make sure is when you do 2 layers, so you come around the first time, you do it thin enough that you're not going to lose detail. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to work on that second layer. So once again, just grab a bit of water. We're going to water down the Cantor blue to the same level as it was previously, and probably a little bit more there. And we are going to keep on going, and we're going to redo, well, not necessarily redo, we're going to do a second layer of the Cantor blue base coat on this assault intercessor whilst the other pieces are also drying. What this will also allow for is a nice even finish on the base coat, and it means that we can then move on to the next step. Alrighty, so now we have actually gotten the second coat of the base coat for blue onto the assault intercessor, and as you can see it's still drying in some places, but you can tell that mostly that it's a nice solid coat and there's not too many streaks in any places and such. If you did want to avoid getting streaks on your miniature when you are doing your base coating, there's only really one of two ways you can go about doing this, is getting a rattle can and using that as your color base coat, or you can grab an airbrush and you can do the base coat via the airbrush instead of doing it via a rattle can or by brush. But I thought it was important to show how you would go about base coating for a full primary color. So the next real thing that I want to discuss before we jump in any further whilst this miniature is drying is paint sequencing. Now what I mean by paint sequencing, it's really the order in which you apply the paint onto the various parts of the model. So you might see you've got a whole bunch of webbing that you could do black, or I'm going to do it as metal to show you guys how to do that. You've got some cloth, some more metal parts, you've got the face, hair, metal around the face as well, you've got the Imperial crest on the chest as well. So really what I want to think about here is what is going to be the most significant color that I want to paint onto this part of the model next, and it's probably going to be the metal, and then I'm probably going to want to do the face, followed by then the gold, and then the brown, because we're also going to then do his hair after the face is fully dried, which we want to do two thin coats there as well. Generally the base coats, it's always best to do two thin coats unless you're working with a paint that's got heavier pigment, such as a metallic that we are going to work into now. We've also got to think about how we want to paint sequence the rest of these pieces as well. As you can see, the backpack, the only other color we're actually going to do on it is the metal itself, so we're going to work on that there. When it comes to the chainsword, not only do we have to do the shoulder pad trim, but we've also got metal that we're going to do on the arm webbing. We've got the chainsword metal piece we're going to do the main color of the chainsword. You've got the pommel of the sword and the wrapping on the chainsword as well. So we really need to think about how we're going to do this part of the miniature, and it's probably going to be the red that we're going to do on the chainsword and the shoulder pads first before moving into the metal, and then we've also got some gold and stuff to do as well. When it comes to the plasma pistol, we've also got red on the plasma pistol we're going to need to do, but we've also got a lot more metal around, particularly with the arm being a mechanical arm. You've got the shoulder pad trim and such, and then we've got the plasma glow, which we are going to leave black for now, but we're going to come back and I'm going to show you how to do some nice plasma techniques in a future video with this miniature. So we're going to leave that there. So we're probably going to start off with the metal, to be honest, and then we'll come back and we'll do the red. And then for this smaller piece here, we've done the blue, that's the majority. We've got some parts of metal. We've also got a purity seal, which needs red, and parchment, which is more of a beigey, bony colour. We've got some gold, and we're going to have some red in the eyes as well. So we've got a couple of different colours there, but because they're all isolated, it really doesn't matter too much where we actually start there. So before we actually jump into painting them, we've still got some paint left on our palette. Now, because we're working with a wet palette, it's going to be actually really easy to just pop open the paint pot, recoup all the remaining blue that we haven't used. If we were working on another miniature, obviously we go on and we work on that. We put it back in the pot, put the pot back down, and we wash off our brush. Make sure that we get as much of that blue off as we can. Obviously now our water has thoroughly turned to blue, and we are actually all good to go for the next step. So the next color we are indeed going to work with is Lead Belcher, and this is the base coat for my metals. So I'm going to give it a nice thorough shake, as you should always do with your paints. Now, as you can see, you've got your wet palette, but we've also got these little cups down the bottom here. I'm actually going to put the metallic into one of these cups, because what will happen is if you actually put it onto a wet palette, what I have personally found through a little bit of experience is the pigment of the metal will actually seep through into the water, and it'll actually taint the water and the sponge that your wet palette is actually on. So now that we're up to this next step with working on the metal, we're actually going to change brushes here. We're not going to do the character brush, we're actually going to use the detail brush, because we need to get into some of these smaller spaces. And so as you can see, it's quite a smaller tip, so we can give it a nice wash, get it ready to go, make sure it's still got that tip, and then we'll grab a bit of water, mix it in with the metal. Now, the one thing I haven't touched on yet is how much paint you actually want to get on your brush. So when you're getting paint on your brush, you generally only want to have about half of the brush loaded, so only about halfway up to the ferrule, because if you get it too close to the end of the ferrule, which I was doing with the regiment brush, you can actually get the paint up into the ferrule. That'll dry your bristles, and eventually over time you'll have bristles snap off and your brushes will get smaller and smaller, and you'll need to replace them, which will happen over time. But it's always best to make sure that you keep them as clean and as fresh as possible whilst doing your painting. So as we're going to start, we're just going to start off on the webbing, and I'm going to try and be as careful as possible, because what we want to do is try and avoid some touch-ups if we can in the next step of this process, if you are wanting to make sure you're not having to worry about touch-ups. You can be careful. I'm going to be semi-careful, and if we need to do touch-ups, we obviously will as well. Now, I've just actually spotted something that I want to show you guys. So you can kind of see in between here, you've actually got, if I bring it up, you've actually got a connected piece of paint, and we don't want that at all between these two models. So it seems to be relatively solidified right now. So we are actually going to deal with that. And so how we actually deal with that is I'm going to grab my hobby knife and just kind of come in behind and just clean that little piece of paint that's kind of connecting between the two from the base coat very carefully. So then we've still got a little bit of leftovers on the wet palette. We'll grab our detail brush and we'll just go nice and easily back over those areas, just to make sure that they are indeed all nice and clean. Sometimes that'll happen, you'll find that might happen in different spots. It mainly happens when the two pieces of a model are really close together in terms of where you're painting. So it's always best to be cognizant of when those do occur. So now that we've got that done, we can jump back into painting the metal. Something I do want to add is that as you see me doing these base coats, and I'm being very careful in terms of where I'm putting the paint and everything, you don't necessarily have to be. So because this is literally your base coat, this is the first coat that you are putting onto these miniatures, by putting these on, you don't have to be super rough, because we're going to talk about the next step in the process after this that I normally take, which is the touch-ups, which is the step of where you virtually clean up your base coating. But we'll get into that in a little bit. Now, at this point, we're up to doing the arms. Now, I had said we're going to do the red first on here and on the shoulder pad before we do the metal. So we're going to do that after we do the plasma pistol. So we're actually going to flip this guy around, and we're actually going to swap brushes to the character brush, because there's a lot more metal that we need to cover that will take a lot quicker with the character brush than it would do with the detail brush. So we'll just grab it out. Same thing again. Grab a bit of water, get the metal onto it, and then we are just going to start finding all of those spots where we're going to pick out the metal on the plasma pistol. Alright, so now that we've gotten all that done, we are going to swap back to the detail brush, because then we're going to be able to get into some of these finer areas at the back. Alright, So now that we've got that plasma pistol nice and metalled up, we are now actually going to swap colors. Now that we've gotten that done, we'll grab the paint that was left and move it back into the pot as we do. So, as we had said, we're going to move on to working with the chainsword arm. Now, we've got two different spots that we need to do the red on. The main chainsword cover itself and the shoulder pads. So what we're actually going to do is we'll start off with the actual main chainsword. But the way that we need to affix this to actually be able to do both is you just kind of mold your blue tack a little bit, pop it on in such a way so you can actually still access both of them. And we're going to use both the character brush and the detail brush for this one. And we're actually going to use corn red as the first color in this instance. So very similar to how we did the Cantor blue, we are going to be doing two thin coats just to be able to get the red nice and solid on both the shoulder pad and the chainsword. So then that way we don't have to stress too much about needing to have streaks or anything in the weapon as well. So just add a bit of water, get it a bit more flowy in that sense. I know it's not a massively technical term, but then we can just come in and hit it with a watered down base coat, and then once we've actually done one layer on here, what we're actually going to be able to do is we could even, whilst we're waiting for this to dry, after we've done the shoulder pad, we could actually even go down to the plasma pistol and do that if the metal has dried, which it might not have. We'll just have to have a look once that is done. Now you're probably wondering, why am I painting some of the areas that the undercoat didn't hit? Well, there's two reasons for that. One, I am particular about the way that I like miniatures looking, and if there are certain areas that could impact that particular look, I want to make sure that I get those areas just in case they are seen. And then two, it's not such a bad thing to just make sure they're covered, and this is the strength of sub-assemblies, is that it allows you to get to those kind of areas without needing to, potentially mess up other spots on the miniature. So some instances it's going to help you, whereas some instances it might hinder you. So it's really up to you how you do go about getting your base coating done. Alrighty, so now that we've got the red finished, what we're going to be able to do is, not only will we be able to come back through and we'll do the metal on this piece, but we've also done the red on here, so we can actually do the parchment, and then we can actually come back through after we've done those. We've got the brown still to go, the flesh, the hair, which we're actually going to leave as black, so we might actually try and avoid putting any paint on that at all as we go through. And then we've got the gold left to go. There'll be some gold on here, and then we've also got gold on here as well. And so next up, we are going to actually do the flesh, because we've already done the metal, already done the red, and I want to show you how I go about doing flesh. Very similar to how you do your rest of your base coats, is I actually do 2 thin coats of rat skin flesh, which is the color we're going to be working with here. So I'll grab the amount that I need, but then I'm actually going to significantly water this down, because I don't want it to be a super thick coat when it goes on the first time and we lose all the details. So you actually want it to be really watery, probably more so than what you did for your base coat of the armor, and then you just work it ever so slightly over all the different areas. Now, whilst we wait for that to dry, we're also going to do the parchment, which is going to start off with a Rakarth Flesh base coat. Now, sometimes you could use Mornfang Brown as well, depending on the color you're going to go over the top with. We're going to do a more traditional method than what I do normally. We're going to grab some Rakarth Flesh, and we're going to do a very similar thing here. We're going to grab the amount that we need, which isn't as much as probably what we want for the flesh. And we're going to do the same thing. Just water it down ever so slightly, and then just slowly but surely working over purity seal parchment, and just making sure nice and tidily that we're getting it all nicely covered. Alright. And so as we were doing that, the face should have dried for the most part because of how thin that paint was, but it's still drying. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave that for a little bit longer, and we'll come back. Because we're using wet palette, we can leave both of those colors and they will stay wet and usable. So we'll be able to come back through now with the lead belcher onto the chainsword. And this is where sequencing does play a bit of a role, because there will be some spots where we have red or we have blue that we're going to go over with the lead belcher now as well. So the way that you'll see that I'm doing the teeth is I'll do the sides first, because then I'm able to actually get the main body of the actual blades done without having to stress all that much about having to be careful when I am doing the actual main tops and bottoms of the blade. And then we'll do both sides, and then I'll come back through and I'll actually hit the top first, and then we'll rotate it around, and whatever's left of the underside we'll hit as well, just so then it's nice quick and easy. Alright, so now that we have finished the metal on the chainsword arm, what we're going to do is we're going to come back in with the Rakarth flesh, and we're going to hit the parchment with a second coat, just to kind of solidify the colour. And then we'll also do the same with the face, because then that way it'll be a nice flesh tone that we're able to then work with. And sometimes because of the wet palette, the paint may separate whilst it is sitting on there. But if it does so, you can just mix it back together again and just be nice and quick about it. Alright, so now that we've actually finished that face, the next colour we're going to move on to, and it's one of the last two that we have to work with for the base coating, is Mournfang Brown. So this colour is going to be on the wrappings of the chainsword handle, and then also on that heavy bolt pistol holster that is on his side. And so once again, we're going to use the detail brush here for both instances, because it's going to be a lot easier to control, particularly when we've got to navigate this smaller space right underneath where we are trying to work on. And I have just spotted an area where I have missed doing some metal base coats as well. So we will go back after doing this and we'll actually hit those areas as well. Alright, so we've got now the brown done, which means that then we can actually come back and hit the areas of metal that we had previously missed. The metal is still usable, but we've actually missed right underneath here, which you can probably see right there, which is where we're hitting with metal at this stage. Alright, so with that done, it leaves us with one final colour that we need to work on, and that is going to be our gold, which is going to be Hashut Copper. Now this gold is a layer paint. I do like this for my Marines a bit more than, say, Balthasar Gold or Retributor Armour, just because it gives a bit of a different tone. When I initially started painting this colour scheme, I was actually using Dwarf Bronze from the older Citadel range, and so that translated into Hashut Copper. So this one's actually going to require a couple of layers, so 2 layers once again, very similar to some of the other colours, because it's not a base from GW, it's actually designated as a layer, so it's a bit thinner. And so it does need that second coat to get a nice solid colour once you've applied it onto the miniature. Alright, so I'm going to let that gold dry, and whilst we work on the gold, what I'm also then going to do is, I've just noticed that the flesh is actually a little bit still like not fully getting good coverage, because there's quite a bit of black still showing through. So just going to hit it a third time, just try and get it nice and solid. And hopefully this will be the last time that we need to hit it to get this nice and solidly covered. And then we'll go back to doing the Hashut copper, getting that nicely worked over and nice and solid in the color. Now I did just spot some brown that I need to fix up as well. That wasn't as strong as I had hoped in terms of its coverage. Alright, now we're going to go for that second pass on the gold. Alright, and so now we've actually completed pretty much all of the base coats. Obviously, we've got the black in a few areas that we're going to leave currently, but to show you what it looks like when you put it all together is going to be the nice look of the model. And you're going to be able to see what all the base coats look like when you actually bring them all together. So we're going to assemble this guy now and put his pieces all back together so you can actually see the result of just what base coats look like. With just base coating, not any washes, no layering, no nothing. We've got a little bit of layering that we're going to do in this video as well. And we've still got some base coating to go by looks, because that looks like some blue that we've missed. But overall, he's looking really good so far in terms of the base coats, and he's ready to go for some layers. Alrighty everyone, so we've actually only got 3 sub-assemblies for the layering component that we're going to be working on for this assault intercessor. We've got each arm individually, and then we have also got the actual torso. He's still got his backpack and the edge piece on. And I've just noticed, literally as I've shown you, that there is a little bit of gold left that we'll do. And we'll do that now. We'll start that off, and that can be done as well as we're getting this guy done. Alright, so with that mishap out of the way, which will happen, there'll be times where you'll look at a model and you think you've done everything on it and you haven't. And whilst I remember, I'm going to hit the blue up and along here, because we also haven't done the blue at the same time. And we've also got the metal that we need to do for there as well. But we'll leave that for now. We'll come back to that. So, the layering. We've got 2 different layer colors we're going to work with. We're going to do a Baden black, which is just going to be on the hair. Really nice and simple. But then the next one is going to be Wazdecker red, and this is actually the shoulder pad color for the 3rd company of my Space Marines. So we're actually going to be doing that over the corn red base coat that we did. So we'll start off with the black, and really this is bit more of a just a touch up or another base coat, if you will. But this Abaddon black is actually quite watered down, and so it does behave a bit more like a layer. And so all we're going to do is grab a little bit, and you'll just notice that we're just going to tidy it up, and this is kind of part touch up, part layer at the same time, just so that we're able to get a nice clean color. Because if we weren't going to be using, if we just did a Baden black as the touch up, right, it'll actually end up being a bit different across all of the hair, which wouldn't be as much of a problem, but I do like a bit of uniformity when it comes to my color choices in different areas. And so by doing all of the hair with it, it just means that it's going to be all the same color and doing what we're expecting it to do when it dries. Okay, so then when it comes to layering, generally you've put a base paint down first, so we're going to be using Wazdaka Red here to do the shoulder pad trim of this assault intercessor, and this is the third company. You know, if you're not too familiar with Space Marine lore, each of the different companies has a different shoulder pad color depending on the chapter. So if you follow the generic Codex Astartes, very similar to how I do with my Marines, then third company is red, which in this case is going to be our Wazdaka Red. So with it being a layer, it's going to be a bit thinner out of the pot, so you won't need to add as much water, and you should only need to do one coat, because you've already done this base layer of the red. So what we're going to do is just start by working it up into some of these areas, and just make sure it's nice and tidy. Don't worry too much if you get it up on the shoulder pad before you are finished working on these sections, because you're going to get it up on there anyway. So the idea of the layer is that you put down a base color, and then this is the next kind of layer that you do for it as you are building up the brightness. Now it could be a highlight instead of a layer where we're just painting that color over the corn red base coat that we've done. But you'll see that by doing so, it actually allows us to get a nice solid base, and we only have to do the one coat of the layer. Alright, and there we have it. We've got both of those shoulder pads with that layer color. Now, to finish off that metal that I missed, I need to actually grab a little bit more lead belcher out, because I actually had the lead belcher that was on my palette dried up, so we're just going to tidy this up. And that is that. Alrighty, so with the pieces dry and ready to be put back onto the assault intercessor, we're just going to pull them off of their blue tack, which we made sure it was fresh blue tack specifically for this video for you guys, so that we didn't have any issues with the paint. And so we're just going to slot these directly in to where they should be going. And after the layering, you can see that there's a distinct difference in the red between the shoulder pad and the weapon red, which is the purpose of it. And there we have it. He is fully base coated and layered, ready to go for the next 2 stages, which will be in the next video. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, well, I thank you all for sticking right the way through this video, right to the end. I know it was a bit of a longer one, but the base coating and layering process and considering paint sequencing can take some time, and I can tell you the raw recording time on this one was about 2.5 hours worth of painting condensed down into this video. Now, I do want to thank everyone who is supporting us here on YouTube with your subs, if you're liking our videos as well, and if you do want to stay up to date with more entries of not just this series, but our Learn to Play Warhammer 40,000 series, or the tournament coverage and tournament previews we're doing here at the ATWN, feel free to hit that sub button. If you enjoy the videos that you watch, leave a like, and if you have any feedback as well, feel free to leave it in the comments down below. I always love interacting with you guys here on YouTube if you do leave any comments as well. Now, if you do want to ask any further questions or interact with me as I am doing my own hobbying, feel free to come over to the ATWN's Twitch channel, where I will do hobbying of my own, or I'll be working on commissions from time to time as well. And you can ask me hobbying questions as I'm painting up miniatures live and actually see the progress that I do achieve on my own models, or the looks that I achieve on some commissions that I do as well. And I also want to thank all of our Twitch subscribers and our Ko-Fi supporters as well. If you do want to support the content that we are creating, feel free to check out our Ko-Fi page, where you can support us with a monthly membership from as little as $1 Australian a week, or you can buy some ATWN objective markers, or you can give a one-off donation as well. It is completely up to you whether or not you support us financially. We'll still be creating our content, and we will not keep any of it behind a paywall at any point in time. And so I hope that you do enjoy the content, and if you do enjoy it, please consider financially supporting us. But if not, no pressure to do so at all, considering the times that we are in also. But ladies and gentlemen, I thank each and every one of you for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.